These guys will defend your Ultramarines heroes from the bullets of the foe. Time to look at the Victrix Honor Guard. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy-minded 40k channel, where we've been going over everything Space Marine and how to get the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. Today we're turning our lens on the Victrix Guard, the Storm Shield bearing bodyguards that come in Marnius Calgar's new box set, and I believe are the first instances of primaris Marines carrying Storm Shields. We'll have a quick look over their rules, any obvious combos we can see, and how I would use them on the battlefield. In the background, the Victrix Guard are the spiritual successors of the Ultramarines Invictus Guard from the Great Crusade. They often accompany high-ranking chapter individuals, and are as gifted in statecraft as they are in martial prowess. So let's have a look at what they can do on the tabletop. So you buy the Victrix Guard as a small unit of 2 models. They'll cost you 60 points for the pair, and they have a fairly beefy, tough stat line. They've got a movement 6, weapon skill and ballistic skill of 3 up, strength 4, toughness 4, 3 wounds, 4 attacks, leadership 9, and a 2 up armor save. They also carry storm shields, which means that they'll have a 3 up invulnerable save, so with a 2 up armor and 3 up invul, they're really not going to be going anywhere fast. Small arms will just patter straight off them as they have a 2 up armor save, and you won't really want to be shooting high AP strong weapons with high damage profiles at them, as there's a very good chance that they'll just ignore it with that 3 up invul. So overall, they're tough. Each model's armed with a power sword in addition to that storm shield, and also frag and crack grenades. The power sword is just the base model that we know well from the Codex, AP -3 and damage 1 in melee. They'll typically be hitting with 5 attacks with it though, as they'll have 4 attacks base and they also have shock assault. They have a few special rules that help them with their bodyguarding duties. They have Honor Guard of Macragge. Each time an Ultramarine special character within loses a wound, roll a dice, and on a 2+, one of the models from this unit can take a mortal wound instead of that Ultramarines character losing a wound. Now this is quite interesting because it appears to be after the character has made any saving throws. Often with these sort of bodyguard type units in 8th, you don't get to make the main character's saving throw before the bodyguard unit tries to intercept the blow. So it's quite nice that the character can use whatever defensive bonuses that they have, say storm shields and decent saving throws of their own. Point for points, the Victrix Honor Guard are only 10 points per wound, which is a lot cheaper than the equivalent points in characters that they should be saving from this. They also have the Heroes of Ultramar special rule, which means that they can perform heroic interventions even though they aren't characters, and can make it quite perilous for your opponent to go charging characters that are nearby them, unless they want to eat a bunch of power sword attacks as well. Finally, they have the rule Calgar's Honor Guard. If your army is Battleforged, this unit does not take up any slots in a detachment that also includes Marnius Calgar. Not necessarily the most powerful addition ever, seeing as elite slots are some of the easiest to come by, but it doesn't hurt to have them not limit your force construction at all. So overall, they're a couple of very tough guys with storm shields and decent saves, who will be wanting to hang around a whole bunch of Ultramarines characters, tanking any damage that could put a mighty hero out of action. And if the enemy does get too close, then they can put out a little bit of close combat hurt, but this really isn't their primary function. So who would it be best to guard with these guys? If you are running a bunch of Ultramarines characters, such as Marnius Calgar, Tigerius, Chaplain Cassius and the like, then it becomes more and more valuable to have these guys around. If your opponent gets some damage through on these models, through whatever means they might be able to, being able to force the first 6 wounds that they force through on your characters onto much less valuable and much cheaper Victrix Guard could give your opponent a real headache, and maybe give your characters that crucial extra turn that they need to fight in close combat, or buff the Ultramarines units around them to win the battle. I think that these guys are most suited to buffing someone really, really big and points heavy, particularly, say, Marnius Calgar himself, as I believe that his half damage rule, when he takes damage, you half the amount of damage that's inflicted on him, means that, say, against a damage 2 shot, that will become a damage 1 shot, and then you can shrug that single wound onto a Victrix Honor Guard. So when your opponent thought he'd managed to get 2 damage through on Marnius Calgar, that should get converted down to 1 mortal wound on a Victrix Guard, which is nowhere near as valuable. Similarly, Rabuse Gulliman is a very, very hard model to get wounds on. His toughness 6 has a 2 up save and also a 3 up invul save. So if your opponent does get lucky and manages to sneak a big damage blow through to him, rather than losing, say, 4 wounds on a 350 point model, something that works out to roughly 150 or so points worth of damage could get tuned down to just 40 points of damage on the Victrix Honor Guard, provided you roll those Honor Guard and Macragge rolls and pass them all. Basically, they're going to be best served tanking wounds for the bigger characters who are a lot more points per wound, such as Guilliman or Marnius or Tigurius. If they're just tanking wounds for a 70-point Space Marine captain, they're not really doing an efficient job, and you may as well just have bought another character of some sort to actually buff your army or contribute towards damage output, because these guys won't necessarily be doing a lot of damage themselves. In terms of stratagems, I'm not really convinced that I'd tend to use any stratagems on them, just because they're too small a unit for them to have any really big effects. You could maybe use transhuman physiology to keep them not being wounded from heavy weapons, but if your opponent's targeting these guys in the first place, then you're kind of winning anyway, as he's targeting units that are very durable but don't really have that much of a good damage output. Other than that, I just think about using a command point reroll here and there, maybe for saving a storm shield shot that would do 3 damage otherwise. Or perhaps if you absolutely need to keep a Space Marine hero alive, you could reroll the roll of 1 on a Honor Guard of Macragge roll. But largely I'd just let these guys do their thing without worrying about stratagems too much. Now on the battlefield, obviously you want to keep these guys somewhere within 3 inches of your character, and if you're running an entire bubble of characters to buff your Ultramarines infantry, then there's no reason not to have all of your characters within 3 inches of the Victrix Guard. I'd certainly think about how the opponent is going to threaten your characters. If they have snipers, then the Victrix Guard might buy you an extra turn or 2 without having to worry about them. Though if this is the case, then I'd think about trying to deploy the Victrix Guard out of line of sight, but within 3 inches of the characters, because they could be behind a ruined wall within 3 inches of the character, so your enemy can't shoot them directly, but they're still protecting said character. If, as Ultramarine Gunlines seem to want to do, you're thinking about moving up and supporting, say, aggressors or intercessors as you advance towards the enemy, then these guys might have the chance to get stuck in with their power swords. I bear in mind that they're not likely to do that much damage to hard targets with them, but they might manage to thin out a few infantry here and there. Certainly they could be quite valuable loitering at the back of a close combat. If, say, Guilliman or Marnius get charged by a scary melee threat, then they might be able to keep him alive for that turn so he can strike back and potentially defeat the foe. So, are the Victrix Guard worth it then, in a competitive Ultramarines army list? I'd say that they're moderately competitive, but they're by no means mandatory in an army list. I'd be most inclined to take them if I was taking a big, strong, valuable character such as Rabute or Marnius, as they could make these HQ models a real headache for your opponent to remove from the table. I'd also strongly consider them as a bodyguard unit for a whole host of minor characters as well. Say if you had a chapter master, lieutenant, librarian and chaplain buffing a gunline. My main issue with them is the opportunity cost of whatever you could take for those 60 points. With only a few extra points you could buy yourself another Hunter anti-air tank, for example, and be very tough and put out a bunch of anti-air firepower. Or you could put the 60 points saved towards more characters, say another captain or chaplain, or just more screening bodies to hide behind, which might keep your characters safe anyway. I certainly think that they could be very, very powerful if used right, but you need to remember that if they are not dying or taking saves to your characters all game long, then they haven't really necessarily done their job. I certainly think they're a very interesting option. It's good to see close combat primaris marines, but you do have to be a bit more of a considered general with how to use a very tough defensive unit well, compared with just a unit that can put out a lot of damage, where it's much more of a simple case of just shoot your opponent. So I hope that some of that was helpful. Let me know if you have any thoughts yourself on the Victrix Honor Guard, or if they have achieved any unlikely heroics. I feel like they are a unit that might every so often surprise you in a game, and wind up accomplishing something much more powerful than they really should be able to, in a similar sort of way as my Guard company commanders often tend to do. Let me know if I've made any mistakes with the rules at all. I'll be continuing my Space Marine Codex reviews over the next couple of weeks, so feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more. Thanks very much for listening, and hopefully I'll see you guys in the next video.